Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, the one and only Dr. John Broom, author of the NEC User Guide, as well as part of the drafting committee for NEC, and the first person to have a doctorate in NEC. So. Excellent. Over to you, John.
Right, thank you very much. So, let's see if I press the button, does it work? Yes, so this is the agenda, and you can read it. I'll say very little bit about me, very little bit about me. The main meat of the session is in this bit here. So the point is, there are more than one form of early contractor involvement, and we're going to look at 6 types of them, which are all variations on a theme. This is the slide about me. I was going to say more about me, but then I realised how many slides I had, so I won't say much. I suppose the main points about it are that when I did after my PhD, I did 2 years of research into into collaborative contract strategies, and early contractor involvement was starting to emerge. So there was a little bit about in that horrible, dull, grey book cover there in 2002. And, there's one more slide there. I've put together, I guess, around slightly under 10 ECI arrangements in total. A lot more contracts because some of them were under frameworks, and that partly as a result of that, I was brought in to help co-author a book on ECI where I'm frustrating the other authors because I'm way behind on where I should be in terms of authoring it. First of all, why ECI, early contractor involvement? Well, essentially it's this one. It just does not make sense when you think about it to get someone involved in, say, here, when they're the ones responsible for this much spend, yeah? That's the fundamental reason to do early contractor involvement. Get the people who have the expertise, control the resources when the big money is spent in before they start spending the big money, yeah? But why not? Well, the main why not in early contractor involvement is effectively you start to single source a contractor, yeah? And therefore, depending upon the timescales of your project, the closer the deadlines to start construction because you need to finish the asset approach, the closer the more they have you by the whatever they are, okay? And so that's the main deficiency of it. So what does that imply? And I'll say more about that later, but it means that you need to nail how they're going to build up the prices, etc. And that's one of the big things where I see potentially ECI falls down. All right. I'll give a little story about that. Years ago, so 20 years ago or something like that, I was brought in by a contractor at the tail end of a very successful ECI contract down in Cornwall. And the reason was because they had 4 good compensation event heading claims. And if they got all 4, then the savings would be 20% on the target. And the client, who was Highways Agency, would then be miffed off with them as a contractor for saving 20% because the target would have been too high. All right? And the contractor admitted it. Yeah, we got away with it. Yeah. And now we've got a bit of a problem. We've made too much money for the client. And for quite some while, certainly with Highways Agency ECIs, there was not one project which came in over the target, yeah? Which you would expect statistically some to come over. What does that imply? So you need to address that, and I'll say more about that later. So you need to nail that. So types of ECI, again, because I'm time pressured, you can have a skim through that. I won't go through them on this slide. I will go through them on subsequent slides. Yeah, they might not mean much to you just reading that, but hopefully when we revisit that slide, it will mean something to you. So first one, simplest type of ECI is, or what I call type 1 and type 2. And essentially what you have is you have stage 1, which is done on a professional services contract. And then you have a separate construction contract, normally for, I've got to press more buttons, normally for, I'm going to move this around so I can actually see it. I hope I haven't knocked something out. Normally for detailed design and construction under a target cost contract arrangement. The type 1 is where you have a professional services short contract, and essentially you're saying to the contractor, I want advice only. Right? I don't want you to do the design, I want you to come in and help my designers design it better. Right? So what are the pros of that? Well, it can be used very early on, very, very early. It's early contractor involvement, yeah? To shape the scope, the methodology, including whether the project is viable or not. You know, it's going to cost £25 million when really it's only viable if it's as an investment if it costs £15 million. Let's stop there, yeah? That could be it. 2 contracts allow for a natural break if it does not proceed. So type 1 and type 2, where there's 2 contracts, there's a great advantage if you decide not to proceed, yeah? So if that's looking more likely, then a professional services contract followed by a separate construction contract might be the way to go. And under the professional services short contract, unlike the NEC 4 professional services full contract, it still effectively allows for a term service option where you can instruct tasks. So little tasks, can you do a report on options, yeah? You can just instruct. So for Connect Plus, who run the M25, they're one of my clients. That's what we have an annual professional services contract. Why is it annual? Because rates go up with inflation, and then during that year we can just instruct a separate task. Yep. But what's the cons? The cons are not really suitable for complex professional services where you've got lots of professionals who are having competing demands and they need to be managed, organised, that decision is dependent upon that, etc., and does not allow for physical works. Right? The professional services short contracts do not allow for site investigation enabling works. So, type 2 is where it's the full professional services contract, possibly with an engineering construction short contract for simple works, simple early works, yep, which could be site investigation as well as enabling works. So, pros of that. 2 plus contracts allow for a natural break. More complex design, both technical and in program, as in this decision leads to that. Those specialists can only start to do that work when that decision's made or whatever, or that design's done. And it arguably gives client more control over design services than when you've gone out to a contractor and it's stage 1. And because you're, as a client, you're dealing more direct with the design organisation, if you like, through the contract. But again, if you're going to have early contract, the engineering construction short contract, you need 2 contracts in that stage. And they need to be linked with a construction contract, potentially. All right? So you need some sort of overarching agreement to link them together, particularly under public procurement. Yeah. So that gets a bit more complicated. I don't think it's insurmountable, but it's a bit more complicated than signing one contract, putting in place multiple contracts with the same person. And what it means is that if you're not sure what works are going to be done, physical works, site investigation, enabling works, that engineering construction short contract needs to be set up with quite a broad description of the works, because you might be adding to it as they say, oh, a site investigation over there would be good, yeah. Oh, actually, we've looked at the programme and some enabling works there would be good and advisable. You've got to adding them on as compensation events, okay? So, which you hadn't anticipated. You might even be hoping there's no work in there, right, or very little, yeah. So that's got to be quite flexible. And is the short contract designed for flexibility? Well, not really. It's simple works. So limited physical works in stage 1, shall we say. So when to use type 2? Probably best to use when either you don't anticipate any, and therefore you don't need a short contract, or there will be limited simple physical works in stage 1. And if it's the former, then you need that provision for the overarching agreement, and as I said, probably easier to implement in the private sector than in the public sector, but not insurmountable. So now, quick dive into target cost contracts, just so that people know what a target cost contract is if you don't. So, in a target cost contract, the contractor is reimbursed defined cost plus a fee to give a line going up here. So, there is also a target prices, around which there is a pay and gain formula. And in this one, it's a very simple 50-50 pay and gain share formula. So in my example here, yippee, the contractor has saved some money. So they get paid their defined cost plus fee as the contract progresses. And at completion, you do a reconciliation between the savings. And this is the amount that the contractor gets, and that's the amount that the client gets. Okay, and it reverses on the upside. So compared with a cost plus contract, the contractor goes, yippee, I've got more profit, and therefore there's an incentive to save money, whereas on a pure cost reimbursable contract, there's the opposite, arguably. Compared with a price-based contract, the client gets this much money back, and therefore that creates a joint alignment of interest, providing both parties are given a big enough share of any savings to focus on reducing cost as opposed to pushing up the target. Okay, that's my 2 minutes, 3 minutes on target cost contracts. So, there's an eye, yeah. So, type 3 is the classic early contractor involvement, which has been around for a fair amount of time. So, on stage 1 is done on a cost plus basis, with the contractor leading the design, often with the designer as a subcontractor. And because it's a contract for works, it means that physical works can be done on a cost plus basis. Now, you can decide that we need more site investigation there. It would be worthwhile doing that earlier before we sign the target. It would de-risk the project. You just do it. And then what happens is there's a break, or you decide to proceed. The contractor submits their proposals, and stage 2 is done normally on a target cost contract, normally for detailed design and construction. Okay? So, what's the pros of it? Well, the pro of it is it's well understood and used. Standard any clauses that have been evolved with use. And I was talking to Barry, and we're on the, if you take into account the consultative version published in 2005, we're on the 4th iteration, or the 4th or 5th iteration of the early contractor involvement clauses. So they should be getting, notice my words, should be getting fairly close to well refined and honed and fit for purpose, etc. Right? So, but having said that, the nature of large ECI contracts means you'll always need some bespoking of clauses. Right? You know, so every one I've looked at, the clients have said, oh, we don't like that, we want this, or whatever it is. So you will need to almost certainly do some bespoking. Complex design, site investigation, more substantial enabling works can be done in stage 1, and it's if you are going to transition to stage 2, having one contract which allows for it, everything's in the contract. You don't have to sign a separate contract and so on. It's much easier. On the other hand, if you don't want to transition to stage 2 because it's not viable or you don't like the contractor, it's more problematic. Yeah. So, what are the other cons? Breaking, terminating the contract is more problematic. Contract has more bargaining powers than under type 1 and type 2 because they're in contract, yeah, with you. Who'd have thought contractors sometimes keep opportunities in their back pocket, proceed to stage 2 where they get a share of the gain and suddenly go, oh, I've had a great idea. I know, it's amazing, isn't it, right? But that was a problem with any source, single sourcing. Yeah? And you still have that to some extent with type 1 and type 2. So when to use type 3? When the design development is reasonably complex versus type 1, which is for advice only. When you anticipate a reasonable amount of site investigation and enabling works in stage 1. And the later types, which we haven't covered yet, aren't as suitable. Okay? Which moves on to type 4. So type 4 is early contractor involvement with one contract under option E with the standard clauses as written. Yeah? So, how does that work? Stage 1 is pretty much the same as type 3. But then, what happens is, stage 2 is on a cost plus contract, but with a target set at a higher level, right? So that higher level includes frequently occurring risks, which you want to the contract, or not free, risks which you want the contract to include in their budget. Big B defined term. So things like compensation events, yep. And the gain in the unamended form is based around savings in project cost only versus the budget, i.e. there is no pain on the contractor. So if the contractor overruns that budget, there's no pain on them. All right? And typically the contract is entered into earlier as there's more risk within that budget figure as opposed to a prices. And any clues as to why I put risk in red and green? There's more, because risk can be opportunities as well, threat and opportunities. So because they're getting involved in earlier, there's more potential to make savings and rearrange the project and so on, less down that path. But also you've got the more risk, which would typically be compensations. There's also potentially more costs, client costs as well in there. So land take costs and things like that might be in the project budget. So just as an illustration of that, you've got a project budget up to higher level, whereas say the target prices under a type 3 would be here. So this is an allowance for what would otherwise be compensation events. The contractor's reimbursed defined cost plus fee. Sorry, defined, yeah. There might be other client costs as well, land take, things like that in there. You share the savings, but in the unamended form, if that line grows up, the client takes all the overrun. Okay, does this sound good, contractors? Okay, right, so what are the pros of it? Well, idea of contract budget is very attractive to clients in the public sector when they've got a big project and they're being given a government funded budget to build it. Oh, can't that project budget in the contract match our budget? Yeah, like that, great, okay. And it's very attractive as written to the contractors because there's no pain. But then clients go, but hang on, I don't see why contractors should only have gain. Because if when we need to, when I'm in the stuck, I actually want them to have a motivation to carry on helping me out rather than just go, I'm out of here, yeah? No, I'm carrying on getting cost plus fee, yeah? So the more it overruns now, the more profit I'm actually making. So they want to introduce some pain. And then contractors go, but hang on, some of that pain will be over costs such as land take, etc., over which I have no control. So I'm taking pain over which something I have no control. I'm not sure about that. Yeah. So as a result of that, what you do is you get the reality is you get a lot of discussion over what is or isn't within the budget, and also reasons for adjusting that budget. So it's not just we're not adjusting it for virtually nothing. There's a few more reasons, not as many as the normal compensation events, but a few more reasons. That's the reality of it. Okay. Regardless, the pinch point is agreeing the risk allowance in the budget. So if you think it's hard negotiating on a target price contract to agree at the prices, yeah, for works which are pretty well defined and which we know what the compensation events or what's outside of it, when you're including those risks in that budget, it's hard to steal, yep. So, going up to these, the other pros, allows for early agreement of budget versus the target prices, providing people are willing to take it on. But the big advantage is there's no arguments or very little argument over compensation events during the contract. So if the problem occurs, it's within the budget, it's coming out of the gain, hopefully, yeah. Let's just address it, right? Rather than saying it's a compensation event, no it isn't, how much, etc. So it does allow people to, the real pinch point is that agreeing the budget. From then on, if that's realistic, it should be all plain sailing, relatively. So when do you use it? I'm in danger of saying, oh, I'm ahead of where I am now, let's go slower, and overrunning, right? So between sophisticated clients and contractors who can get a handle on the risks to be added onto the prices to arrive at the budget. That implies a degree of repetition in the nature of the works. You're not guessing at the risks, yeah? Because you've done work of this nature before. Which implies, and because both parties are negotiating or agreeing it, and it is negotiation to some extent, an ongoing relationship. And I do genuinely mean a relationship of trust, yeah? Because, as in, you're not going to screw me over. You're not looking to get the lowest budget, you're looking to get the right budget. Okay. And where that is in place, it can, and I know it has gone very well, yeah. So one of my, Connect Plus, their latest framework for improving the M25, which is funded by National Highways, that's what they've moved towards, because on the previous framework we had that provision, and while they did Type 3, the traditional ECI generally, they've moved towards that because certain circumstances in COVID meant, and price fluctuations and everything like that, meant that the contract, they put a much higher budget with a good share of, with the clients taking the majority of initial savings, yeah? And it worked extremely well. So they're moving towards that in their next framework. And because they've got a good reputation as a client, contractors are willing to bid on that arrangement, yeah? If they were a client who had a reputation for screwing the contractors, I don't think that we would have got many interested. Okay. So, moving on to Type 5. This is option A with amended X22. And if I go right back, I'm wary that I'm now starting to go into territory I wasn't going to originally mention, right? If you go back to the origins of early contractor involvement, you could say it's a matching up of mashing together of target cost contracts with the preferred contractor approach. And the preferred contractor approach was where big London developers had their favoured contractors, and basically they'd negotiate. They knew what they wanted, they knew roughly what it should cost. They would negotiate with their contractors who they have an ongoing relationship for a building, and it would be done on a lump sum basis. Yep, that was the preferred contractor approach. So what is this? Stage 1 is services, site investigations, other work, enabling works delivered under an option A price contract with activity schedule. As I said, equivalent to preferred contractor approach, except the contractor is paid directly for stage 1 while it's been going on, rather than, well, we'll add in sums into stage 2 to cover your costs from stage 1 if the project goes ahead. There's the break. And then what happens is the second stage is done under option A. So when should you use option A as opposed to target cost contracts? Well, when you can define the works much more precisely, both here and there, yep. So, what's the pros of it? Well, compared with, gives you the greatest budget certainty because you don't have to take account of pay and gain. This is the prices. If nothing changes, which hopefully if we do a good job in stage 1 will be limited, gives us the biggest, as a client, budget certainty. But that means that the definition of the works needs to be more defined, because otherwise you're just transferring risk. Right? So well-defined projects, but which you want you want to nail the details effectively of it. There's no need for the hassle and cost of open book accounting, and I'll say more on open book accounting. But open book accounting compared with the is it activity complete, yes or no, is a hassle. Yeah, okay. So it saves on that. But if you're a repeat order client and you've got no idea of what your projects are actually costing, as in costing, the contractor to build, you're just seeing the price. How do you know you're not getting ripped off? Yeah, in subsequent projects. So you lose that advantage. So I have actually heard of target cost contracts with the contractor having 100% pain and 100% gain, purely so that the client can see the open book nature of it for repeat order clients. It seems a bit much, but there we go. I have heard of that. And X22 is not designed for this. So this comes from a webinar on the ECI where a certain person said, please don't use ECI for option A, it's not designed for this. And in that sense, the person concerned is right because it doesn't make reference to option A, it makes reference to C and E. But apart from that, you could just put in a few things and say, if it's under option A, yeah. The question is it the right contract strategy and making a few tweaks to it? It's not many tweaks to it. Okay. Minimal amendments need to make it suitable if it is the right contract strategy. So, when to use? When the client requires greater certainty than other open book based types, but the nature of both stage 1 and stage 2 services are more certain than other types, perhaps with the exception of type 2 with the early contractor, engineering construction short contract involvement. And then we get on to the last one, which is optimal early contractor involvement, which is something I dreamt up for one client on the Cross Tay Link Road and then discovered and then was told, oh, that's optimal early contractor involvement. And then it reminded me of an example which I'd heard about and actually arranged a seminar on years ago. So not me involved, but someone gave a presentation on it, and it was something like that for the bank underground station redevelopment. But this is for Cross Tay in Scotland, just north of Perth. So what happens is the target prices are tendered in competition by contractors, right? So this makes it more attractive to public sector clients because there's a competition with there's a figure, yeah. Yippee, I can measure that, yeah. Stage 1 is normal ECI, except any enabling works have to have strong governance over them. So to bring works forward into stage 1, physical works, there's got to be a good reason and it's subject to the project manager's acceptance. And Perth's sort of background on this was we previously did an option A lump sum design and build job, and we thought the contractor was sort of going to win it and think about how to do it best. But being contractors, they went, hey, let's get on and do it, and encountered lots of problems as a result. So they deliberately wanted, there's a year for you to develop your design, your proposals, your methodology, etc. And if you want to do some works early on, you've got to come up with a good reason, yep, for it.
John, sorry, so when they tendered at stage 1, they tendered for the design and the construction?
The design, yeah, because what happens is the costs from stage 1 are incorporated into the target for stage 2, so yes, okay, yep. And then what happens is you enter into a target cost contract, but there is the transfer of the reduced risk, because you've done a lot of work in here. So things which changed on the Cross Tay Link, we did what they've done in the latest amendment, which we said is to judge physical conditions, it's from the time of your submission of your prices for stage 2, yeah. Any adjustments that are made, yeah. So if you identify physical conditions in stage 1, which you go, ooh, crikey, didn't expect that, those could adjust your tendered prices, yeah. But you can't enter into stage 2 and say, well, we didn't expect them back there. It's from whether you expected them when you submitted going into stage 2, yeah. So if you'd lose the physical conditions compensation in effect in stage 1 if you didn't enact it. And also what happened was there was a client scope, and effectively that became the contractor's scope on signing on proceedings to stage 2. So the contractor took responsibility for that because they'd had a year to look at it and develop their detailed design. So in that sense, the prices had much more certainty around it. Right, okay, I'm almost there. Okay, so saw Chris looking at his watch. So pros for it. Compared with other types of tender, it gives the most price competition. There's 2 tenders in there shouldn't be. And the most price certainty, as in the target prices, at the end of stage 1 prior to the notice to proceed. Not necessarily budget certainty, that's probably the type 4. Yeah. The cons are some scope, including constraints, need to be sufficiently developed for contractors to tender. So the project needs to be a bit more developed compared with the other ones for them to work at a price. The most amendments compared with X22 of all the types, because it's the most different probably. And my experience of that is that the tendering contractors need reassurance that it's okay. And the client was very good about that. We ran it past them, we got feedback. Some of that feedback was good, we took it on board. Some of it, no, let us go through this again, yeah? And reassure you, yeah? I know we're transferring more risk to you, but on the other hand, you'll have the chance to during stage 1, yeah? So hopefully now, when you look at that, you go, oh, I've got a bit more of a feel for what each type is rather than when I put it up first of all. What we haven't covered is variations. So here we go. So you could do, for instance, professional services short contract prior to this. Yeah, as in, give us an outline of it. You know, is it viable, this project? Yeah. What are the options? Before, oh yes it is, we'll go down to that one. You could do one of these with option A, yeah. Yeah. Professional services, short or full with option A. You want Connect Plus, the latest one. What we're doing is as I said, professional services short contract for early contractor involvement, which includes scoping out what we want them to do with them, yeah, in a workshop type arrangement. What's the ECI scope for stage 1 under this one, effectively, yeah? So we get them to understand the project, because effectively we do it on a not quite taxi rank system. But is it your turn, subject to performance? So there's numerous variations you can do, and I'm sure as time goes on, more will emerge. Thinking about that, alliancing type arrangements, etc. So, last slide, I think. General comments on ECI. I've covered a contract strategy, how you arrange the contracts and so on. Contractor selection appears to me to be critical. I look at some of the different ones I've got in, exactly the same contract strategies, but for slightly different projects. The quality of the contractor shines through on this. So you are employing them much more as a professional, as opposed to a grunt, yeah? And therefore, what's their experience, who are you going to get, etc. And I think related to that, and perhaps I was thinking this morning when I was going through the slides, what should also be in there is how do you incorporate their promises, both at tender and from stage 1, into the main contract, all right? Because otherwise they're just, you know, hot air. Despite the January 23rd amendments, I would still want to make my own amendments. The nature of larger, I didn't cover that earlier, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous contracts, there we go, VUCA contracts, I remembered it, I managed the A, I normally forget that, requires bespoking to circumstances, not least type 4 to 6, yeah? You're going to do some amendments. And despite it being on the 4th or 5th iteration, reading through those January 23 amendments, my first or second reading, I'd already spotted 3 things which as a contractor I might wish to exploit, yeah? And I've just put up one of the ambiguities. Is pricing information which implies it's static, but they describe it's how. How do you arrive at the prices for stage 2? And it's prepared by the contractor. Well, I want to be telling people what the process is, what I want to see, etc., not the contractor. So there's ambiguity there, but there are some, as I said, there's some things which I'd exploit or potentially think about exploiting if I was a contractor with the current amendments. And the other thing with any target cost contracts, I've seen it done well And I'm not going to say it's as little as it's easier than doing activity schedules, no way. But if it's done well, it can be and set up correctly, and the key is in setting up correctly, then it can be relatively pain-free. On the other hand, I frequently see it done badly to appallingly, okay? And it just becomes a bureaucratic quagmire, right? Which the client is paying for twice, because you're paying for the contractor to bring forward the evidence and you're paying for your PQSs to administrate it, right? So having an early contractor involvement stage where hopefully not too much money is being spent gives you the ideal opportunity to get it up and running smoothly, proactively, rather than, oh, we're spending loads of money. No, you're not, you are, yes we are, etc. and so on. And I think that's all I'm gonna, that's my conclusion. So, here's my conclusion. So, people heard of Warren Buffett? He's the world's greatest investor, and he's well known for his very succinct phrases. And I like this one, okay? And to do collaboration properly, as opposed to just cooperation, and they are different things, requires investment, both pre-contract and at startup. So I raise this question, is your projects or projects worth it? And that'll be a combination of value and how volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous they are, okay? So don't just go into it, ECI, it's the new emperor clothing. Be a bit more discerning. Right. Oh, wow, that's a surprise.
Thank you very much.
Right, okay. Do you want questions now or?